We have two contenders for the people who've travelled the furthest to be with us today. One is sat up here, I think, Dallas Campbell, who may speak to you a bit later and might take over my job, I hope. And the other, I'm really delighted to be able to invite somebody who has actually been into space to speak to us now. Cady Coleman is a US astronaut, and over to you.
Hello. So I know that everybody hasn't had a break, and I'm the kind of person that if I need to go have that break, I just do that. So you should feel free to do that. I'll still be talking when you get back, but you should really feel free to do that. I've really had the nicest time today. I came a little bit late. I came over from the States yesterday to Dublin, and then over from Dublin this morning, and it took a little while to get here. But I've had the best time just listening to all these different subjects and all these great explanations, which I'm the kind of person that likes these things. And actually, I was terrified of your game. The presenters got to see each other, some of them, their slides, and I was looking at these going, ooh, I don't know. Ooh, I don't know. And I didn't actually look and calculate, especially because I lost on my calculation on that one. I'm embarrassed. But I'm not. My point is that all of us are different in the way we contribute to an exploration mission. I'm not actually a person who particularly knows numbers or things or how many, how big, and yet it's valuable, and when I saw that, I was like, oh, I don't know this stuff. And yet, there's always room to learn something. I mean, certainly room to learn something. And, it's important to try to keep some of those things in your head so that you just can put things in context. And every single talk today has been different, but it has shared a perspective with all of us that helps us understand kind of how to keep these things a little straighter in their head. And the topics are so pertinent. So I just think it's really a marvelous day, but it is a long day. So I will launch into just really kind of a story of spaceflight from my perspective of just my trip to space. And in some ways, some of the things that are more planetary that we've seen, it's about having a different lens. Like when we have a different instrument or a different telescope, we found out different things. I mean, we knew about 9 planets, if you count Pluto, for the longest time. And now, what are we up to, 1,009? Or I don't have the total number from Kepler. What's that? 4,000. And so, really, things change when you find a different way to look at them. And that's what the space station is all about, is that it's a test bed for us to look at some things that need looked at before we're ready to go further. And I did stand up and vote this morning for the humans, because I hate for us to be left out. And plus, you guys would worry if I didn't, I think. But really, I think most of us think that the answer is both, that there are so many uses for each to play a role, and that we'd be silly to think that one is the answer. This is one of my favorite pictures because only 3 humans have ever seen it with their naked eye, and that is the space shuttle. Let's see if I could do this. The space shuttle right there is on the International Space Station attached. Is when Paolo Nespoli, Dmitry Kondratyev, and I undocked in the Soyuz from Expedition 27. So that was about actually very close to exactly 6 years ago today. When we undocked, the shuttle was present for STS-134, and we left and we flew we went a lap around the Earth, with the space station and took a series of pictures. Paolo Nespoli took all the picture and video. And so if you ever see the shuttle attached to the space station like this, there's only one time it's ever been done, and that was for our undocking and then landing. I do have a shuttle background as well. I'm a fairly persistent person. I joined NASA in 1992. And I flew twice on the shuttle. 1995 was a space station mission that was like a precursor to the space station. I mean, I say it a space station mission, but it was really a shuttle mission where we practiced laboratory things. STS-73, where we actually did 30 different experiments and tried to answer questions like, how do we get the data down to the ground so that scientists down here can really, see their data and manipulate it and understand what it's really showing. For example, we did some protein crystal growth experiments where I, as a crew member who had a chemistry background, trained and talked to scientists, protein crystal protein crystallographers, to know what are good-looking crystals, what are bad-looking crystals. They had a camera looking through a microscope, and then they could see on the ground those crystals, but not with the resolution to be able to make good enough decisions that they didn't need my observations as well. And the best experiments, on robots, on rovers, up on the space station, the best ones are the ones that could work automatically, and the worst ones are the ones that work automatically, right? And the reason is that when they break, you want to have somebody there that can help, can fix things when things don't work as expected. But really, if you can automate things, crew time is the most scarce resource on the space station. And so if you could get your data without the crew actually having to be in the loop, you're going to get more data. My second shuttle mission was the Chandra X-ray Observatory. We've heard a lot about astronomy here, and when I did that mission, I'm a chemist, and one of my goals on the mission was to finish reading, at the time, a textbook about X-ray astronomy, because I knew as soon as we landed, this textbook would be obsolete. And I wanted, Steve Hawley was one of the folks on our crew. He was an astronomer, and his job was to fill in the black hole in my head where astronomy was supposed to live. And what I really learned from Steve is I would ask him something. I'd be trying to read this book. I go, well, you talked about white dwarfs this way, and in this book it's that way. And he goes, well, it turns out, like it's a moving story that's evolving day by day. And that's because it is, which I think is very exciting. So being part of that mission, launching the Chandra and having the Chandra, which was only supposed to work for 5 years, still give us data was really a great privilege for me. And I learned a lot, and I'm happy to be part of something with such a legacy. So most of this would be about the space station, where I spent 5.5 months up there, Expedition 26-27, launching before Christmas in 2010. Actually, the day after my 50th birthday. This was a very good birthday present. My husband wanted complete credit, and staying up until a little bit after May. We go up in groups of 3, and so there's 3 up there, 3 come, 3 go home, 3 more come. So we're really part of 2 different groups of 6 people. This is my first group, where when we got up there, Scott on the far right, and then the 2 Russian guys on the far left, they were already there, and then Paolo, Dimitri, and I came up. And this is a picture of our whole entire crew getting ready to go to space, really excited about going to space. Kind of, right? And I say that not, probably a tiny bit to make fun of Dimitri, but really, I learned a lot, and I think it applies to what all of us do in our daily lives, whether it's at home with your family, or at your job, or at your school, when you're working in a group where you don't get to pick who you work with, because that's what it's like, I think, for all of us in most of our endeavors. Or you pick them, but then you really have to live with them in the case of spouses, right? So really trying to understand what's life like for them. This is actually a picture of our crew excited about going to space. And Dmitry is a fairly traditional Russian, of which the other cosmonauts are not as traditional as he is. And smiling in a picture isn't something that he especially does. Expressing himself emotionally is not something he especially does. And so that was something I really needed to understand in order to, really get the most out of each other for the mission. This is like about a 4-minute film here. And how long do you guys, should I try to be maybe another 20 minutes? Can we do that? Yeah, sure. Okay. So this is you see the 2 patches from the 2 separate groups of going up in 3, being 6, 3 coming back home. I love this because it's not animation, it's actual film, the shuttle looking out the space station. And there's just a tiny bit in this film of kind of getting ready. To me, I didn't care who I went with, the Russians, the Americans, the space shuttle, the Soyuz. I just wanted to go. I'd been on a 16-day mission, and I really felt when it was time to go home, I just thought it is way too soon. And people belong up here, and we have a lot of work to do. So this is launch evening. I'm waving to my family. You can see my son and my husband coming up. My son was 10. He kind of hates all these pictures because now he's 16. And we all agreed we'd walk slowly and take small steps out to the launch pad or to report in. But we're all kind of nervous, you know, and if you see the whole film, it looks like, you know, Charlie Chaplin or something. And then we are inside the Soyuz. It is a smaller craft than the shuttle, and it's wonderful in that respect where, I mean, when you're in the shuttle, it's kind of like being in a big airplane. I mean, it's a big craft, and you're in a small seat, whereas, you know, this is like being in a smart car, and it's you and your 2 crew members sitting elbow to elbow. And it is the size of a smart car, actually 2 smart cars. Once we get up there, we can actually open the hatch. I was in the last days of our last missions where we actually got to go up to launch, spend about 2 days, the 3 of us, orbiting the Earth alone, and then docking with the space station. And now they do that much faster in the space of about 6 hours. So now we're up in space. I was the second person to capture a supply ship from the station using the robotic arm. And then I went on to do a lot of work with SpaceX and Orbital Sciences and the commercial companies. We captured the Japanese supply ship, and we also had the tsunami while we were up there, the Japanese tsunami, and so that was a really particularly tough thing to have happen because these were friends and colleagues that we'd trained for years with down in Japan, having such difficult times. Those white cranes that you saw that were the origami, they represent hope and rebuilding for the Japanese people. I will tell you, having just witnessed my math in public over there when we did the bigger and smaller quiz, is that the only thing harder than doing math in public is doing origami in public. They sent us 19 pages of directions. So this is another point in the mission. It looks, you know, sort of routine, but the shuttle is coming up, and that's happened a lot before, and yet one of our tasks is to take photographs of the shuttle's heat shield. And it's a whole big, long series, very much in focus, and if you don't do it right, you have to actually take a whole day of the docked timeline and take those pictures using the robotic arm, which is immensely harder. And so getting that right was something that was imperative. And I would say that both Paolo and I were pretty nervous for that, and very proud when that came out that we did really a great job at it. And so the shuttle's here. This is like having relatives that you're really excited to see. And then they come, and after about 3 days, you're sort of ready for them to go home, right? You know, there is a sensitivity there. This was a wonderful crew, and we actually really didn't want them to go home. But it's just great to have them come and to be part of the work. It's a little bit hard, like there's things they forgot to tell you. There's things that you forgot to tell them about what you're going to do together. This is a robot that they brought up in that spaceship. This is the Robonaut, and I think he had his picture. The robot is the one on the left. And that robot is actually a cooperation between General Motors and NASA to look at, you know, what's it like for robots and humans to work side by side together. This is just flying through the space station. The flying part is really my favorite part of being up there. This floating around, I mean, that's kind of from the shuttle days when the ships were smaller. But now that they're big, I mean, you're flying everywhere. And you haven't known me very long, but I'm not the most particularly graceful person. And up there, I am excellent, you know? Okay, let's see. I wanted to talk just not really about spacewalking, but just to celebrate your very wonderful Tim Peake, British astronaut. You know, we're all different. We all bring different strengths. He was a wonderful spacewalker. He's a wonderful sort of person that can bring the space program to you. Ever since I've heard his first interview, he is a model of what astronauts should be like when they're interviewing. Even though we all have our own personality and our own things to say, he is really, really good at thinking about what are the things that these people need to hear, no matter what they asked, actually, and how to express that. And so I really revere him in that way, and he's been wonderful to be a part of the astronaut family with. I was very proud. I didn't actually get to do a spacewalk. None were planned. It's not really fair to hope for something really dangerous to happen so you could go out in your spacesuit and then say you did that. Not that that was what Tim did. I mean, his was planned. But it's kind of fair to hope for something like expensive to break. And there was one time in the middle of the night where the alarm goes out off, and we all, you know, pop out of our cabins and fly down to the main computer, and we gather there, and Scott's like, yes, it is a big box out there on S0, like outside, go do spacewalk. And before we could even do anything, and I'm not saying that, you know, they had their helmets on or anything, but because it would have been Scott and Paolo that were first, and then I would have been part of the second group. But the ground called up, and they go, hey, you know, it's a box out there on S0. We just have to command power and data. We've got a spare out there. You guys can go back to bed. We're like, oh, fine. And then a little bit about microgravity science experiments, you know, that this is now that lens that I'm talking about, where the fact that everything's going to float around, and actually this is the worst nightmare of the entire being up there and living and working up there, but especially working, is losing things. I mean, you let go, you forget. I can be actually fairly absent-minded, and you forget something and it floats away and it can be lost forever. I found someone's pocket knife that they lost 3 years before. You know, it was actually their grandmother's pocket knife. And so that's the magic of that microgravity environment, but it does give us a different lens. We get to see, what do liquids really want to do up there? And down here on the ground, we can measure some of these things. I mean, this is like things like surface tension, where it's just very tiny compared to the force of gravity, and so it's really hard to measure down here. But up there, it's the dominant force when we take away much of that gravity. We can do it down here. We can levitate drops, but it adds some heat. I mean, there's always the things you're doing correctly, and then there's the things that you're simulating that are kind of confusing your experiment. And so up there, we can really just learn a lot about what do liquids really want to do. And it's useful for everything down here that involves flow through a pipe, or those tiny, tiny little forces. Like if you're going to put a drop of, you know, something on a slide, a bodily fluid, and it's going to tell you something about your health, that's those tiny capillary forces flow through our veins. Every process down here that uses flow through a pipe, we're learning answers for that. I think it was mentioned, understanding how much fuel you have when you, you know, as you touch down on the lunar surface. It's hard to know about those last bits. One of these experiments, let's see, actually this is combustion, but I'll just tell you this real quick and then we'll see that again. But it's just a really simple experiment. It's a video camera. It's containers of different geometries. You look at what shape the liquid takes in there, and you can understand some of those very tiny forces better. And we found that by changing the angle of the container by just 3 degrees, you could actually guarantee that all the liquid was in that corner, and so you could be measuring your fuel better on the way to Mars. And yet it has those very big Earth applications as well. So you just saw this round candle flame. And again, this is like a different lens to look at a process that's important down here on the Earth for pollution, for combustion, understanding energy efficiency, how things burn. And then this little bright spot that happens afterwards, it's a secondary ignition that we didn't expect. So we're learning about combustion in space, but for Earth, it's really important as well. And the measurements that we have to take down here on the Earth that we take in less than a second to determine the slope of a line, we can take over 30 or 40 seconds. So it's really just immensely a different wealth of data. We grow crystals more perfectly, not always larger, but more perfectly. Applications for protein crystal growth, for designing drugs for diseases, semiconductors, anything where the crystal and the purity of the crystal itself helps you determine whether you're going to have the material that you want to make more of or not. Benchmarking materials. And, you know, for example, as a chemist, it could take me 6 months to make or at least to make a new molecule. Whereas if we could and then I make a crystal of it, we make a measurement for nonlinear optics. Maybe the measurement is bad. Is it because it's a bad crystal or a bad material? And so being able to have a place where we can make materials differently gives us ways to understand things for down here on Earth as well. For our health, the losing bone density is a fact. I mean, if we lose bone density about 10 times faster than a woman who's 70 years old who has osteoporosis. So what she loses in a year, we lose in a month if we do nothing. And yet I came back with the same amount of bone that I left with, pretty close. And the reason for that is not because I'm Superwoman, but because we've learned a lot about how to retain bone and how to build it back. Realistically, I mean, the current theory is that if your bone is like a pipe, then we're losing bone out of that meaty kind of middle, and yet we're building it back on the outer edges. So we have kind of thicker pipes, but maybe not as well connected inside. And we'll see what happens as we go through life. Every year of my life, I will get a physical, and I'll just tell you that whenever any of us has like surgery and they take something out, everyone wants to see it. Let's see. And so I loved being part of these tests. I said yes to really all the things that I could. And I'm very proud that that research has to do with life here on Earth in terms of osteoporosis, in terms of heart disease. Our hearts actually don't have to work as hard to pump blood all the way up our body. And so our heart muscles actually get sort of larger and weaker up there. And that's similar to some similarities to aging hearts. And so we're learning a lot about those things. And getting back to osteoporosis, exercise is really part of that answer. And we have an exercise machine now that has a really great range of motion. And so doing weight-bearing exercise like heel raises and squats and things like that. We've got a lot of plant experimentation going on, starting with things that I did many years ago on the shuttle. And then we're doing them up on the space station. And we've gotten to the point where we're actually growing and eating lettuce up there. And that's really in a morale way really important, but for that journey to Mars, it's imperative. We don't have a way to make food that lasts longer than 3 years at this point. And for that kind of journey that we're talking about, we really need to be able to have nutrients for a longer period of time that stay good. When we have all sorts of scenarios of how to get to Mars, storing food, storing supplies, we need to be able to have that. And just to be able to have food that is good. This is like a little bit of living in space, getting weighed, running on the treadmill. We exercise about an hour and a half every day, about an hour of weightlifting and about half an hour of cardio. I mean, it's up to you, but somewhere in there, and about half an hour to clean up. So it's a lot of time, I would say at least 5 days a week, and maybe more like 7. This is our cabins, climbing in. You don't have to have it affixed to the wall there. You can shut the door so then you can float around in your cabin. It's kind of fun to do. Some people miss having a pillow, and they actually strap a pillow to their head. And then this is the cupola, which I think in a very human way, I liked the talk that we had on Earth observation. I mean, having those windows in a spacecraft complicates the engineering. You would think that they're not necessary, and I will tell you that they're completely necessary for the human experience to be able to see. I mean, can you imagine going to Mars and never seeing it, like a flyby? Even these robots get to see it, right? I can't imagine not going. I like this just because I think that we're going to have a whole new life up there. It evolves every time we get a new crew member up there. I imagine Mr. Peake brought up some of those more interesting British games, right? Satoshi likes to play baseball, but everybody was busy, so he has to be every member of the team. And this is a skill that looks like it takes a little practice. I mean, it's not like diving off a cliff here, where we actually have that arc automatically, but we have to, up in space, we have to sort of like, yeah, a little practice, yep. And in real life, just taking, I think being a real person, it takes a little bravery. I'm looking out at the kids a little bit here. I love to play the flute. I'm not the most amazing flute player, but I love to play. Some of you may know Chris Hadfield. He's well known for his music as well. And we have 2 astronaut bands, and Chris and I have played music together for 26 years or so. But this is an Irish flute that I brought up. Bringing things with you is kind of a way to bring people with you. And so I brought up an Irish flute and an Irish tin whistle for a band called the Chieftains. And so that flute is more than 100 years old, and I thought it was pretty wonderful to have this old flute and this brand new space station, and just the juxtaposition of those things. And if you look on the internet, you can see like a St. Patrick's Day greeting from the space station, because in my family, I'm a quarter Irish on each side, but it adds up to really much more than a half. The other flute that I brought up there, and this is the one, Nicole, you could turn it down. Yeah, thank you. You can just hear it a little bit. But this is a flute that was owned by Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull. And so I brought his flute up there, and he's from England here, and he's a big, big space person. I'm surprised he's not a member of this society. I'm going to have to talk to him about it. And it was really a great privilege. We played this, this duet on a very special day. The first time it was played was when he was playing a concert in Perm, Russia, and I was on the space station, and that was on April 12th of 2011, which is the 50th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's flight. So to have him playing in Russia and me on the space station, and to play music between Earth and space, and realize that, you know, as much as we'd like to be further, we've come a long way. So he's really just a wonderful guy to be working with. And now here at the end, just some pictures of the Earth, but I want you to think more about perspective. You know, that this is, there's a space station on the Earth, and we had some really great analogies about distance. I thought that was pretty wonderful. And I love those things. You might have noticed me taking pictures of a bunch of the slides. I love it when you capture a way that makes sense to me, you know, how to explain things to people and how to explain them to me. So I really loved a lot of the analogies that we saw today. When you have a view like we just saw, and this is our cupola, this is our place, our windows that we look out of, I just have this feeling I must be up in order to see so much and so far. But really, if you think about where we are, we're actually, if we're at that space station and we're seeing the Earth, we have to be down, right? And that's something that most of us could never wrap our heads about. I mean, that is actually the cupola on our space station looking down at the Earth. So I ended up, I would just have to, as I flew into that module, I would just have to flip myself 180 and just accept the fact that, you know, everything wouldn't look right unless I did that, which is interesting to me. And so, you know, Italy indeed shaped like a boot, but I'm imagining that maybe Britain would be a little more exciting, and so that's, you know, London in the middle. When we first went up there, Paolo and I and Dima, we used to look at the Earth at night. I mean, during the day, a lot of it sort of looks the same. You know, there's all this, the colors aren't as vibrant, and it's a little bit hard to know exactly where you are when you're first up there. But the cities at night, you can see London, and then you can see Paris, and you can see Italy, and helps you feel like you really understand a little bit more about where you are. And it's just an amazing kind of view. London. And Tim sent me these, because I meant to find some and didn't, and wrote to him, and he sent me some nice pictures. So it's really just the most beautiful and amazing place. This is a stop action video. Again, getting back to that idea that a different lens can help us understand more about what we're looking at. And it makes a little sense in terms of photography. We have better cameras up there than when I was up there. This is stop action photography, where it's just, you know, frame after frame, kind of in a hurry. It was actually at first disturbing to me to see this, because it's faster than we actually go around the Earth. Those little white flashes are all lightning. But being able to have better and better cameras allows us to bring those things home to you and to let everybody see. This is where I come from. I'm from New England. I've commuted between Houston and this spot right up here. So here's Boston and Cape Cod. Here's New York, Long Island, New York City, the Hudson River. And up here in the hills is where my husband, who's a glass artist, lives. And so, you know, basically, exploration is important enough to me that for 26 years, I lived apart from my family, and I had the privilege of having this really amazing job. I was up on my first mission with a guy from New England who, when we first looked out and saw Massachusetts from the air, and it's, you know, that very distinctive Cape Cod geometry, he looked out and he goes, "Oh my God, it looks just like the map." It's true. And so, you know, then there's landing, which is solid, very solid. And I tell people, you know, here's physics in action. And I told you I was taking pictures of some of the slides and listening to these explanations. And there's always really more to learn, and some of it's hard and some of it's easy. Physics for me is not simple. And when I read some equation in a book, you know, okay, and then this happened, and then there's an equation, I'm like, okay, fine, what happened? Where to some people, that's a sentence, right? But not to me. And so that doesn't mean I don't need to know what it said or understand it or be able to use it. And so I just have to ask for more explanations. And so if you think that math isn't for you, or science, or that stuff is hard, I mean, it's too bad that it's hard, but it's for all of us. And I know if you're in this room, you're already converted. But I think a lot of the explanations that you heard today, you can go out, you can go back to your neighborhood, you can explain these things to kids, you can explain them to adults who want to know but really don't know how to ask, right? And I think it's really valuable to help everybody understand the place that we live in and what it's like. So this is just coming home. This is about half an hour after landing, talking to my family. And then it was really nice to be home. Not so much, I mean, I loved the view that we had, but it was nice to come home and be just part of the view. And, you know, you don't have to go to space to see amazing things. This is Aurora here on the ground in New England. Wonderful to come back to my family. It was really hard to decide even to go, having a son who was 10. You know, did I really want to do that? And finally decided that this was really who Jamie's mom really was. But I did want to leave him with someone trustworthy, even though he had a dad, of course, too. But this is our cat. Our cat's a Maine Coon, and it's a little confusing for these Maine Coons. They think they are dogs, and really, you just cannot convince them. I mean, they fetch, they do everything. That cat follows my son around the house. You know, it's really amazing. But now we have a second one, and he wanted me to make sure that you understood that he was actually reasonably grown up now. And so, that it takes really a family. I mean, I'm married to a wonderful glass artist guy who's busy with his own vision. I've really loved the things that we've seen today. So many different drawings and descriptions. And I mean, people who do movies, these are, people explore in different ways. Josh actually made these glass planets a dozen years before we ever met. Now, I did marry him so that I would have wedding presents for life. And it's worked out pretty well in that respect. But they're really, really special objects. And to me, they were special long before we ever met, because I'm somebody who, when I have some kind of goal, like getting this job, I put things on my desk to remind me that I am doing this. I am working at this. And I can believe, even though it's a hard thing to tell people I want to do. And I just think that different people explore in different ways. And out here in the audience and amongst the speakers, you know, we had so many different artistic renditions and descriptions. And we all need that, because otherwise, I mean, you can be the best, you know, rocket space propulsion designer in the world, but if you can't explain that concept of why, amongst all others, it's really going to work and it's going to take us there, we're not going to do this. So it's really important to gather those people to you. If you're the technical type, gather an artist, gather a storyteller, gather a kid who will ask the obvious questions that really need to be asked. And if you're one of the others, then gather the parts that aren't you. I think we have the privilege, you know, being up in space, we have the privilege as a team that we have to do that. The mission seems so imperative that we just throw away the fact that we don't like each other if we don't, or that we don't like the food, or that we're bored or tired or don't feel well, because the mission seems so important. But the missions down here are equally important, and in terms of actually making sure that people and robots eventually get to go. And so I will just leave you with never leave your curiosity. It's really important. Every question, I mean, the kids are brave enough to ask them, but as adults, ask them. You know, really, you just need, because you bring other people with you on that journey when you ask those questions. And my last slide, when I was in this picture, I mean, I stick out because we had a little wardrobe miscommunication, okay? Scott looked at Mark and he goes, "You didn't tell her," you know? And yet I stick out in this picture, you know, visually in a certain way, but nobody knew when I was in third grade or when I was in high school or when I was in college that I was gonna be in this kind of picture. And so we don't know, and I'm looking at the kids here, and I'm looking at the people who are doing work in these fields. You know, which one of you is going to be getting these awards that lead us into the future? We don't know, and that's why all of you are here, I know, and all of you need to be ready. So thank you very much, and I know we're late, so I don't know, do we want to just do questions at the break out there, or what would you like to do?
Is that okay with you?
Of course.
I think it's going to be...
We just don't want to get too...
so many people that want to ask you questions, so if that's all right with you...
Very much.
Perhaps we could break at this point and be back at about 5 o'clock, if that's okay, so that's half an hour. That was really super. Thank you very much.